In the last few videos, we've been looking at constructing triads based on different degrees of various types of scales. Now, all of these triads we've looked at so far have been in what we call root position. Basically, this means that the chord is voiced, in other words, the way the notes of the chord are spread out, with the root of the chord being at the bottom. But these triads can be voiced or reorganized so that either the third or the fifth degree is at the bottom. When we spread out the notes like this is called inverting the chord. With the triads we've been dealing with so far, we can have three possible voicings or positions. We have root position, like this, which we've seen, with the root in the bottom. We can have the root jump up an octave and have it start with the third in the bottom, like that. And that's called first inversion. And then we have second inversion, where we start with the fifth on the bottom. Now, we've seen that we can identify these triads with a system of Roman numerals that tell us which degree of the key signature or scale the triads are built on. Well, we can elaborate on this Roman numeral system by also indicating about the specific inversion of the triad. Now, this is done through a system of adding regular Arabic numbers after the Roman numeral. And these numbers are based on the intervals between the three notes in the triad. Let's look at what it looks like in notation. Here's the first example. We have the root position triad that we've been working with so far. There's the C triad. So a couple of statements we can make about it. When a chord is voiced with the root in the bottom like this, it's considered to be in root position. The interval between the top and bottom notes is a fifth, and the interval between the bottom two notes is a third. So let me just switch to a graphic I have here, and you can see what that looks like. Here's that C triad. So there's a fifth between the C and G, and between the C and E is a third. So in the key of C, this chord would be notated as 1 with 5-3 added on, and that's because 5 is the interval between the outer two notes, and 3 is the interval between the bottom two notes. So technically, to notate a root position chord, we would write the Roman numeral with 5-3, but common practice is we generally don't add the Arabic 5-3 for root position chords. We just notate it with the 1 or the 2 or 3 or whatever function it is, and no additional marking implies that it's root position. Let's go on to our next example here. I'm going to hide the keyboard for a moment. And here's the first inversion triad, starting with E on the bottom. So this is the first inversion of the C triad. Third is placed on the bottom, and the root is moved up an octave. Now, the interval between the top and bottom notes is now a sixth between that E and the C. And the interval between the bottom two notes is still a third. So again, let's switch to another graphic. Here's a description of the first inversion triad. So here we have the third in the bottom, so the interval of a sixth between the outer two notes, interval of a third between the bottom two. So in the key of C, this chord would be notated as 1. That's Roman numeral because it's the root chord. Even though the root isn't in the bottom, it's still the 1, the tonic triad. And we indicate that with a 6-3 superscript marking like that. 6 because that's the outer interval there, and 3 because of the lower interval there. But in common general usage, we abbreviate it with just the small number 6. So that would be 1-6, or 2 with a 6, or 3 with a 6, whatever function it is for the triad in that key that we're in. But in this case, it's 1. Let's move on now and look at the next example. Here's a second inversion triad with the G on top, and I'll just play it to remind you what it sounds like. So this is a second inversion C major triad. Both the root and the third have been shifted up an octave. The distance between the outer two notes is still a sixth, and the distance between the bottom two notes is a fourth. And let's look at the details for that. So here's the second inversion major triad, the interval of a sixth between the G and the E, and a fourth now between the bottom two notes. So in the key of C, this chord is notated as 1-6-4. And again, that's derived from the interval of a sixth there and a fourth there. And there's no abbreviation for this. We notate it in full with a 6-4 in small superscript in regular Arabic numerals. So that's how it's notated. Now, the same thing applies here to minor triads. Let's look at this. We have a C minor triad in root position, first inversion, and then second inversion. And just to show you what it looks like on the piano. And an octave lower. So 3 inversions of the same chord. And finally, here are all the diatonic triads in first inversion. Let me just resize this so we can get it into one screen. There we go. So here's the C major, but we're starting on the third. The D minor, starting on the third degree of that triad. The E minor, starting on the G, which is the third degree of that triad. And the F major, the G triad, and so on. So if I was going to notate these in Roman numerals, it would be 1, 6, small 2, 6, small 3, 6, 4, 6, 5, 6, small 6, 6, small 7 diminished with a sixth, and 1 finally. And here's the same thing with the second inversion triads. So we're starting on the fifth degree now. So these are all the same chords. This is still the key of C, and this is the 1 chord. C major, but with the fifth in the bottom. D minor with the fifth in the bottom. E minor with the fifth in the bottom. F with the fifth in the bottom, etc. And this would be 1, 6, 4, small 2 for minor, 2 minor, 6, 4, 3 minor, 6, 4, 4, 6, 4, and so on, like that. So I want you to get these under your fingertips. What you can do is go back and do the last exercise from the last video where I had you going up all of the scale tones, building triads in root position, and do that now once through in first inversion and once through in second inversion. And you can do the same thing with the minor triads as well. And I want to introduce another concept to you at this point to leave you with, and that's closed position or closed voicing versus open position or open voicing. So far, all of these triads we've been looking at, regardless of the inversions, have been what we call closed position or closed voicing, meaning that all the notes fall within one octave. But these can easily be spread out over the keyboard into what we call an open voicing or an open position with much wider intervals as the notes are spread farther apart. So let me just give you a little example. I'll bring the piano back up. So here's the closed position C root position triad. But we can open it up. So I got a nice big wide open voicing, but it's still root position with the root down low. Here's an example of a wide open position C minor triad voicing, again in root position. With lots of notes being doubled. We're going to look at voicing in more detail in a later video and how the inversions can be tied in for some nice voice leading and bass movement, but we're going to get into all that. So that's it for now. In the next video, I'm going to give you some more interesting exercises and ways of practicing and breaking up these triads.